This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It's 4 minutes after 10 and you are, well, you know that you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a remarkable headline, isn't it? I know I'm saying this most days now, but the A to Z theory is very pertinent, isn't it? The idea that if you woke up 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and read a headline saying doctors will be forced off picket lines, you would probably think you were reading a foreign newspaper, wouldn't you? You would not have thought, certainly in sort of 2010 or 2005, but I think also probably in 2015, you know? You picked up a newspaper, you walked past the newsagents, you turned on your radio and heard some Herbert reading out the headlines. Doctors will be forced off picket lines. What picture does that conjure up immediately in your mind? Right now, just don't close your eyes if you're driving, but if you're not, what? I mean, just sort of, do you see gunpoint, handcuffs, cattle prods? Doctors will be forced off picket lines. I hope it remains a headline rather than a reality, but it's a headline based upon what the government, what ministers, what Steve Barclay is apparently calling for. This would be the minimum service level regulations that were enshrined in law without anybody really noticing what it would mean. It would mean that medics and nurses in this case would be compelled to work during industrial action even if they had voted and elected not to. And the question of public safety, what is and what is not public safety, is decided by the government that has presided over 13 years of failure to invest in infrastructure or indeed safeguard recruitment and retention for the NHS. So the people who have arguably brought the NHS to its knees sit in judgment on the people who are arguably trying to save it by taking industrial action, and it is the former that get to decide what constitutes public safety and not the latter, not the people who have taken a Hippocratic oath. I think, is that metaphorically speaking, or do doctors still take a Hippocratic oath? I think they still do. Right, so who would you trust with the simple question of what public safety actually is? Steve Barclay or your GP? Listen, there are, what's the word? I don't want to say wrong-uns because everyone will immediately think of Russell Brand, but there are wombats. There you go. That's a suitably mild turn of phrase. There are wombats in every profession, okay? There are even wombats in this profession. Sometimes the wombats turn on each other, which can be particularly diverting, but it would be ridiculous to say that all radio presenters are excellent people, or that all doctors, well, you can't say all nurses are, with the Lucy Letby case still very fresh in our minds. But I do believe in something called vocation. I truly do. I don't think... And I know we've had conversations lately about narcissism and even messiah complexes among some consultants, but that just proves my point about there being some wombats in every profession. I do believe in the concept of vocation. I'll tell you partly why I do believe in the concept of vocation, because I don't think I emerged from it very well. And sometimes when you offer up an explanation that casts yourself in a bad light, it can be a little bit more valuable than an explanation that casts yourself in a positive light. But, I mean, there are other jobs I could have done. I only ever really wanted to be a journalist. I know what you're thinking. It's still not too late, James. I only ever really wanted to be a journalist. But if I had been contemplating other careers, then I could have done something more altruistic. I could have done something of more obvious good for society than becoming a gossip columnist originally. I like to think I do some good now, but I don't have a sense of vocation, or I certainly didn't when I started out. I have now in my life quite a few people who are approaching the end of their A-level year, or rather just beginning their final A-level year. And when I listen to them discuss what they want to do when they grow up, I recognise that distinction. And the drive to go into medicine is quite often driven by a sense of public duty, by a sense of altruism. I see the same about teaching. Again, please don't pretend that you're hearing me suggest that they're all excellent and altruistic and good. I was at college with loads of people who described teaching as the safety net into which they would fall if they couldn't get the career that they really wanted. But equally, there were plenty of people who really wanted to be teachers. I have a tiny little sample set, but among the 17 and 18-year-olds that I know, the ones that want to be doctors, I off the top of my head, so it's about 5 of them, 4 out of 5 of them are driven towards medicine because they were poorly as children. This isn't going to be a statistically sound observation, but it's a helpful one. So the desire to look after other people in the way that they were looked after themselves is a part of the motivation that has driven them into medicine or wanting to do medicine. I still hold on to that, and I think I always will. When teachers go on strike, when teachers went on strike and my children were still at primary school, I found myself marvelling at the idea that we were being encouraged by all the usual suspects. We were being encouraged to trust our children's welfare, education and safety to these people, but not trust them when they told us why they were taking industrial action. We're being, so here is my child, please look after them, I'll see you at 3:30. But you can take your explanation for why you are taking industrial action and stick it where the sun don't shine, because I'll be following the lead of the Daily Mail on this and the Conservative government. Thank you very much. And that just struck me as odd. I thought it was quite a helpful way, perhaps, of breaching the footballification of politics, where every strike is good or every strike is bad. But with regard to teachers, particularly when you look at the so-called real-term remuneration and indeed the state of the profession in terms of staffing and support, I just found it a bit ridiculous that you would trust these people, these adults, with your child's welfare, but not trust them when they told you why they were taking industrial action. And I can't believe, this is what I mean by the A to Z theory, that if we woke up to this headline a few years ago, we'd be off our flipping chollies. Doctors will be forced off picket lines. What are you talking about? Doctors will be forced off picket lines. You don't force people to work. There's a blooming word for that. But that's the headline that is on the front page of the Daily Telegraph today. And I can't quite believe it, because I can't conceive for a moment of a majority of striking medics being motivated by anything other than concern for the future of their profession. And that, of course, encompasses their own remuneration. They know what you need to be paid to keep morale high, to keep the sense of value in place, to keep the ship afloat. That they know what it is now compared to what it was then. They don't care what it is now compared to what it is in other countries, albeit that the attraction of Australia and other places seems to grow exponentially every week. But to not actually meet them halfway, sit down with them, negotiate, have talks, acknowledge the financial reality of what has happened since 2010 seems to me to be almost unbelievable. When Margaret Thatcher did it to the miners, I studied it, I think, at A-level actually, and you can understand what happened. The big, don't ring me about this, by the way. I need my phone lines for the doctor's strike. But the big miscalculation that Arthur Scargill and the NUM made was that Margaret Thatcher was perfectly prepared to preside over the disappearance of the mining industry in this country. I don't think anybody clocked that until it was far too late. So there was a belief among miners that however bad it got, if they could just stay together, eventually the government would have to buckle, because a United Kingdom without coal mines was to them inconceivable. Now, a year ago, I would have said to you, well, that's obviously not the case here. A United Kingdom without a national health service is truly inconceivable. There's no earthly way. I can't even remember who was Prime Minister a year ago. Was it Boris Johnson, Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak? Answers on a postcard, please. But there's no earthly way Boris Johnson, Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak are going to preside over the actual disappearance of the NHS in the way that Margaret Thatcher and her colleagues were prepared to preside over the actual disappearance of the coal mining industry, right? And I still believe that, but I don't believe it as completely as I did a year ago. So it can't be that, or at least if it is that, you're going to have to work quite hard to persuade me that it is that they are actually adopting the path that they're adopting because they want to somehow destroy the NHS in an existential sense. But this notion here, I mean, we'll look at the broader question of the strike if you want. It's entirely up to you. I just sort of hope that consultants who are going on strike today for 2 days and junior doctors who will join them tomorrow for one intersecting day will avail themselves of. Actually, I should be a bit more serious about that invitation. I would love you to explain to my listeners why you are on strike in your own words. 0345 6060 973. Right, that is it's an invitation I don't offer often enough, actually, because industrial action is becoming so commonplace. But if you want to, as a striking consultant, as a senior or junior doctor taking industrial action this week, if you would like to explain in your own words, uncorrupted by the lens of newspaper coverage or sort of lazy politicking, in your own words why you are going on strike, then 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Also, please give us a call and tell us why you're not going on strike, because not everybody will be. Not everybody voted for it. So it's important to recognise that that contrast here, okay? The number remains the same. But I think the thing that amazes me most, and I catch myself every morning now coming pretty close to asking you, how did we end up in this place? Regardless of whether we're talking about sewage or policing or interest rates or what was it yesterday? We were talking about something yesterday that, Liz Truss, a year after her catastrophic premiership, somehow trying to cast herself as the victim. How I do, don't I? Every day there's a temptation to chalk up the topic as what? Sorry, what? Pardon? How did this happen? What? I don't think we can do that quite every day, but don't be shy of answering the question if you think it can. Doctors would be forced to work during strikes. I don't need to read the rest. Under government plans to tackle the dangers caused by successive walkouts. Doctors would be forced to work during strikes. There are two perspectives from which you can answer this. The perspective of a doctor, which we really need to hear. 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. And from the perspective of non-doctors, like me and most people listening, I can't quite believe where we are, to be honest with you. Doctors would be forced to work during strikes. Now, I think if I was forced to work during a strike, the quality of the show would not be as great as you have come to expect every morning. If I was on strike and there was some sort of legal mechanism by which they could frog march me into this studio, handcuff me to this chair and force me to burble into this microphone, even if I was trying my hardest to do my best, which would quite frankly be unlikely, I would not be on my usual scintillating form. I'd be discombobulated inside. My stomach would be churning. The sense of resentment I felt at being manhandled into the studio would be very difficult to dissipate. I'd be cross and sad and scared. I'd be forced into... I don't think that is going to happen to doctors, for the record. But what the hell are we even thinking when we contemplate the idea of forcing doctors to work during strikes? I don't even begin to understand it. So, if you are a doctor, what is your response to this apparent government policy? 0345 6060 973. And if you're not a doctor, have a crack at explaining this to me, or simply telling me how you feel about having woken up in a country where the government and its client media is happily floating the notion of, and I quote, forcing doctors to work. How would it even happen? What would it even look like? What would it actually involve? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 10 is the time. James, listening from a hospital where I am working as a nurse, the government do want to break up the NHS. It's been clear for years. It was Hunt, the Chancellor, who wrote a pamphlet about how to break it up and sell it off. Same old Tories, absolutely horrific what they are doing. The whole NHS should strike over the new proposal. Thank you for what you are doing. Erica in Murfield wonders whether we can force Parliament into work. They are indeed on holiday again. Well, they're in recess this week because of the looming conferences. Des points out that forcing a person to work against their will is slavery. Well, not if you're getting paid, Des, I think, technically, but it's a fairly chilling development, isn't it? And I don't quite understand this latest, if you like, development or this latest evidence of it. Doctors will be forced off picket lines. Doctors would be forced to work during strikes under government plans. Under government plans is all you need, really. Forced to work. Just tell me what you make of that. 21 minutes after 10. And also, tell me what you make of the suggestion now in September 2023, the longer this industrial action goes on, something that I didn't let you say on the well, I always let you say it, but I would have jumped down your throat fairly quickly on the programme a few years ago, even if perhaps a few months ago, that there is a plan to dismantle the whole thing. There is a plan to blow the whole thing up, to burn the whole thing down. Because say what you like about the last 13 years of government, burning stuff down seems to be the only thing they excel at. 22 minutes after 10 is the time. Saeed is in Harrow. Saeed, what would you like to say?
Well, just wanted to say, first of all, the word Great Britain is becoming a horrible Britain, to be honest. The way how the government is being a mafia right now, trying to force people who want to go on a strike and forcing them.
How would they do it, do you think? How would it work? You'd be told... I mean, that's possibly the question I should be asking. Doctors, what you'd be told if you don't come to work today, you won't have a job to come to tomorrow? How would you actually force doctors to work?
Well, I have no idea, but I think it's just pretty bad, to be honest. Like, they're forcing everyone, doctors, the nurses, they're forcing us as general public to go and buy some electric cars and forcing people to do things which we can't do now.
No one's forcing you to buy an electric car, Saeed. Petrol cars. Petrol cars. No, that petrol cars are ULEZ compliant, mate. I know there's an awful lot of misinformation out there.
In everything, the government forcing everyone.
All right.
To do things which is against our will, you know, like even like the doctors.
Well, give me another. Let's dig into this. What are you personally being forced to do against your will at the moment?
Well, for example, like in the ULEZ, you can't afford to pay for this £13-14 a day. You know, every day.
So what are you being forced to do against your will then?
To go and buy a newer car where we don't have the funds for.
Well, so have you done that? Have you done that?
Well, no, I've not been able to do that.
So you haven't been forced to do it then, have you?
Well, I can't afford it. The car's parked there.
So how are you getting around at the moment?
Well, my missus now catching the buses. She has to walk like 40 minutes every day sometimes.
Right. So she's not really being forced to do anything except catch a bus.
Well, she is. I mean, they're obviously using the public transport.
Not forcing people to breathe dirty air. I mean, we're talking about doctors being literally marched off picket lines, and you're complaining about having to catch a bus.
I'm just talking about generally speaking everywhere possible.
And also, that's not even the government, is it? That's the Mayor of London. That's albeit that the Tories brought it in. That's not even the government. But no, all right. I'm being unfair. I'm being unfair. I recognise your sense of grievance, but I don't think you've got any better idea than I have of what the hell this would actually look like. What would happen if Keith said, "I'm not coming to work"? Right? And I said, you have to. Well, actually, it's not my call, but let's pretend it was. I said, you have to. If you don't come to work, let me use the language of Steve Barclay in the Daily Mail today. So Keith will be forced off picket line. First line of the story, Keith will be forced to work during... So how would it actually happen? What would it actually involve? How can we even be printing stuff like this, let alone reading it or saying it out loud? We're going to force doctors to work during strikes. I just wanted to explain to me, perhaps, before we conclude that it is one of the most chilling contributions to public discourse that we've seen in a while. Andy's in Newcastle. Andy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I'm a junior doctor, have been for about 10 years now. I just wanted to sort of give maybe a more pragmatic view of what you're trying to explain to your listeners. So I think forcing off picket lines is probably, there's a fair element of sensationalism to that headline.
Sure. You have to hope so, don't you?
You have to hope so. What will probably happen, although I think we had this, we're talking about this about 6 months ago. So mandates being put on bodies such as the BMA to sort of incapacitate them and stop them from allowing a public workforce like doctors from striking. So you've got this already in place with the police, I believe, and I think the military as well. Something to that effect. I'm not sure how it would work out. But
I think the police voted for that in return for other considerations back in the day. I'd need a police federation person to confirm, but surrendering the right to industrial action is usually done in return for other pledges. But I could be wrong.
So that's how I interpret it personally.
This?
Yeah.
So it's not actually that they go... So are you on strike tomorrow?
I'm actually not rotated to be at work, but if I was rotated to be at work, I would be striking.
That counts as being on strike, doesn't it? I think.
In my head, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've striked all the way through so far.
And is it striked or struck?
I've been saying striked.
Striked.
I don't know.
No, I think it's striked. So they're not actually planning... But I don't get... That might be the end game, right? To rob you of the right to strike. But in the meantime, how would the legislation be... How would minimum service level regulations be implemented? I don't quite think you can argue they're never going to be... Go on.
It comes back to what you were saying about Christmas Day cover. We are already at minimum service levels on bank holidays and Christmas Day. Those are deemed to be safe by the trust that employ the number of doctors and nurses and whatever to staff them as such. I don't see how you can turn around and say, well, hold on, we've been doing this for X number of years. We think it's not safe and we want everyone to be at work. Well, it just doesn't work out. The math doesn't add up.
No, so the government would have to say, because we have decided that tomorrow, due to strike action, public safety will be compromised. We must also retrospectively acknowledge that public safety has been compromised on every bank holiday, every Christmas, every high day and holiday for the last 20 years.
Exactly.
I'm still not clear on what you think they're going to do.
I think they're going to incapacitate the BMA. I think they're going to...
But you're not sure how. I mean, it's not your job to be sure how, is it? But so it's more about a long game to rob you of the right to strike than it is to actually frog march you into surgery tomorrow I don't know, on the end of a cattle prod or a taser or something.
Yeah, it will be the case that you've still got the right not to go into work. However, there will be consequences in terms of your employment. Much as in any other job, if you decided you didn't want to go into work today, James, you don't have to get out of bed, but there'll be a consequence from your employer.
Yes, there would. But of course, industrial action should be protected by law, which is partly why Angela Rayner gave that speech that she gave last week, and partly why so many people on the right of the British media got their knickers in such a twist about it. How dare she suggest that workers should have the right to protections, to collective bargaining? And I hope Andy's wrong, but I haven't got my arguments in place to contradict him. The only bit that's missing in his analysis is that explanation of how this would actually lead to a sort of dilution of the BMA's power. How would the fold occur? How would you go from being able to strike to not being able to strike without so-called minimum service level regulations being imposed? Some medics and nurses would be compelled to work during industrial action. I haven't heard the Steve Barclay interviews this morning, but please tell me that somebody asked him how that would happen. If they did, can we find the clip? How would that happen? Here is a striking doctor who the powers that be have decided must go to work. How does the next bit unfold? How does the next bit happen? Because if you can't answer that question, then the problem is perhaps a little more opaque, but even bigger than we initially feared. It's coming up to 10:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, I hope I'm not overreacting, but a headline that states doctors will be forced off picket lines, the best possible response you can have to that is Andy's suggestion that it's a little bit sensationalist and we probably shouldn't be taking it literally. But I'm currently taking it literally. Thomas Watts is here now with your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:33 is the time. I suppose if I'm professing genuine ignorance, then I should be a little bit more polite to people trying to fill the space and also guard against my hope that you're wrong. But this is from Howard. I don't know what Howard's perspective is, I think he might be ex-fire service. They will send out letters informing you that you are required for duty on a given date. You, because you're on strike, don't turn up. They will then sack you. You appeal and are ordered to return to work on a new contract with no right to strike. They tried this with fire service staff. At that time, it could not be enforced, but with the new rules, who knows? You don't return on a new contract, winner, no staff, no NHS. I've got to stop being, what's the word? Is it complacency? Where you think, no, don't be daft, they wouldn't do that. I presume people sat here in the 1980s saying, don't be daft, they wouldn't actually get rid of our entire mining industry. They wouldn't actually allow... No, I'm still not ready to go there. Nitya is in West London. Nitya, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, good morning. Hi, I'm a doctor. I'm a consultant in a West London large trust, and I'm striking today. And I actually agree with Andy, who called in just shortly.
Yes.
I think it probably is a sensationalist, headline-grabbing
but
maneuver.
that might be the equivalent of thinking that Margaret Thatcher would never allow the coal mines to shut forever.
That's the best possible outcome, really.
Yes.
Hopefully it is just to kind of... Because I think that they're running out of moves. They're refusing to discuss, to get to the table with the BMA. So they don't really have anything else to say. So I guess they have to put something out to the newspapers, and this is it.
So they can't say we're just not engaging at all because reasons.
That's what they've done effectively.
I know.
They keep saying we will not negotiate on pay, which clearly is one of the core issues. And I think it's also quite stupid because I can only speak for my own trust and the way we plan around things, and I'm striking today, but I made that decision only jointly with the rest of the team. We figured out who's going to be on site. We currently have 5 out of a team of 15 or so, which is way more than a Christmas Day cover. And so the rest of us were fairly free to take the days off as strike without feeling worried about patient care or anything. In fact, it's a pretty good cover on
yes.
site. And previously, I have been on site where things were a little bit thinner on the ground over the summer holidays. So this is how we base our decisions. We plan around who's going to be on the day. So it's a bit stupid to say we're going to drag the doctors off the picket line and force them into work over patient care when we're striking about that issue in the first place, which is
yes, I think that gets lost in the weeds sometimes. What is the lever? I hesitate to ask this question, but what is the? I don't know if you can have it both ways, Nitya. There must be a diminishment of service, otherwise the strike has no leverage.
There is a diminishment in service, and we try and minimize it as much as possible. The delays are mainly to outpatient, just more sort of routine care, and of course that's not to say it's not important at all, but those delays have been ongoing for so many years and way before the strikes that this is kind of a drop in the water. I don't think anyone anticipated it would go on for months, and we were hoping there would be a resolution sooner.
Why do you think there hasn't been, just from a personal perspective? I think because you sound surprised at the
I am surprised.
Because for two reasons. Number
it?
one, you thought your case was clear, presumably. And number two, you presumed that the government wouldn't preside over this sort of atrophy.
Well, it's just ridiculous because just looking at the number of appointments that have been delayed and the actual financial impact, just coldly looking at the numbers, it is mind-boggling that they haven't resolved this sooner. Because I think even giving in midway to the pay demands to the doctors would have been. Don't quote me on this.
No. You're not a BMA spokesperson.
But I think
it's
I'm not. But I think it probably would have been a lot less than the huge financial impact of the combined strikes.
Oh, well, that reminds me of the railways, where actually not meeting the unions halfway costs in the long term much more than meeting them halfway. It is stupid up to a point.
The heartache for all the patients, it is horrendous. And we try as much as possible. And for example, we've got 5 people on site today, and we are trying as much as possible to prioritise. We're not just looking at the emergency. We're trying to prioritise the sort of semi-urgent outpatients as well. So, I don't think any doctor, and obviously I can't speak for everyone, but I don't think any doctor wants to harm any of their patients in any way. over money.
Can you conceive of circumstances in which it will just peter out? In which he will drift back?
Yes, you know what? It's a shame, and especially for say the nurses and the junior doctors, where the financial impact is quite a lot more. And if you can imagine, losing 3 days' pay over a month is not nothing. And so I think there will come a time when they just cannot deal with the financial impact anymore, and I think it's quite sad. And
that is perhaps what the government's calculation is.
I think that's what they're probably hoping for, but it's just such a sad end to things, because I think the workforce is already very demoralised. Just a small anecdote: I know someone who worked 35 years in the service, and they were given £100 and a small box of biscuits or something as thank you. Right. But it's just the way it is. And claps. That's what we get.
Claps, lots of claps. Always got the claps, Natia, including the members of government on their doorsteps with their saucepans and their wooden spoons, but not prepared to sit down and talk when the occasion demands. Thank you. It is 10:39. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I suppose we derive some comfort from the widespread consensus so far, from two doctors at least, and another one on the way, that we are not going to see doctors being cattle-prodded into surgery anytime soon. So it becomes politics rather than policy that we're examining. Doctors will be forced off picket lines. And I think they would need to extend the current legislation. I think that doctors and nurses were exempt from these so-called minimum service requirements. But, I mean, the way things stand in the House of Commons at the moment, they can get almost anything they want through. David is in Walthamstow. David, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
So the way I see it is, assuming that this is more than just brinkmanship and talk, is that at the moment when we're on strike, we're providing emergency cover. Yeah. So if you had a heart attack or stroke, you fell over and broke your leg, you were run over by a car, you would get treated, and you'll probably have the same treatment as you would have had on any other day of the week. Yes. Obviously, what's been postponed is all the planned and elective stuff. Now, if they revamp the minimum service agreement, what I would see, the way they would do it, is to suck more things into the minimum service agreement. Right, yes. So that, therefore, certain kinds of appointments, certain kinds of operations, which aren't life or limb threatening within the next 24 or 48 hours, but you might deem them as being urgent.
So this is the derogations, I think, to use the technical term.
The derogations, exactly. Okay. So once those derogations, if you like, are sucked into, and in some way in law, and I don't know how the legislation works, but if it was sucked in and it became a legal requirement...
So they increase the number of services that come under the Minimum Service Levels
Exactly. Act. Then, now, so if I'm striking today, because I'm not one of the team who would be providing that sort of emergency cover, I would have been doing a planned work. So therefore, it's fine for me to strike. Now, if they deem under the minimum service agreement that actually some of that planned work is now sort of encompassed, if you like, by that agreement. Yes. If I then don't pitch up to work, it's like me not pitching up to work on any other day of the week.
Got it.
I could be sacked. I've basically done a dereliction of my duty. So if this is more than just hot wind, if this is more than just trying to scare the doctors and get a little bit of public opinion on their side so that they can show that they're doing something and they're in the public's, that they're in the public's camp, then this is the way I would see how it would progress. You would be, by contract, you would be required to come to work,
and therefore you personally would go.
Well, I can't afford to be sacked.
No, exactly. So it is a sort of tightening of the screw, isn't it? Really.
It's a tightening of the screw, but what will happen, and this is interesting, right, so someone like me who's well into his career as a consultant, I would just have to take it on the chin. Now, there was a recent survey that showed that I think 1/3 of all medical students are planning to quit within the first 2 years of qualifying and emigrating.
Quit the NHS.
Quit the NHS, absolutely. So not quit
medicine per se, but the NHS.
Yeah, quit the NHS and quit this country.
But this is
now. Let's say even that was Yeah, no, let's just even say if that was over-exaggerated. Let's say it's not 30, let's say it's 20%.
Yeah.
That's still 1 in 5. That's still 1 in 5 of your newly qualified doctors. Now, if that's how it is now, if you then had this legislation where the incoming, medical students / new to be junior doctors felt that they couldn't even represent themselves because they would be sacked if they did, well, that number's only going to increase. So you'll go from 20% to 30% to 40%. Now, that's just, you can't run a health service. We can't run the health service as it is with the manpower we have and the drain that we already have. And something like this will even would make it much, much worse.
It was, I think it was about a week ago, that survey.
It's just within the last couple of weeks. I read it in The Guardian, but I'm sure it's been in other...
It's a British Medical Journal. I missed it. I'm just sort of marvelling, really, at the fact that something as stunning as that will receive a tiny fraction of the coverage compared to what you've just fairly expertly dismantled as the worst sort of political scaremongering.
Yeah, and you know what their solution is in their workforce plan. So their solution is not to try and stop the efflux we have of medical students. And
is that a word? Is that a word? Efflux? Is that a medical word?
I've sort of made it up.
I love it. Now I feel bad. I thought you were actually introducing us to a new word.
I think it does. I don't know. I think
efflux.
We like it. I hope my colleagues aren't going to.
It's the opposite of influx.
Exactly.
But technically, wouldn't it be exflux?
A membrane.
It'd be exflux, wouldn't it? Not necessarily.
I think I've seen it spelled as efflux.
Efflux.
Well,
all right, carry on. Sorry, that was not probably the wisest intervention.
No, it's fine. We'll say right. So their plan for this is rather than to retain doctors, is to now bring in these roles which are called sort of physicians associates. Right. We've got something called anaesthetic associates, which basically means that you do a degree in anything, and then you have 2 years sort of training on the job. And you will then be doing some of the more technical parts of what a doctor does. And what, for example, what a junior, and by junior we've got to be careful, we're talking...
Of course, people with 10 years.
Yeah, we're talking about people who are in their 30s. People who are in their 30s and have a lot of exams under their belt. So they'll be doing that job. So it's dumbing... I don't mean this in any disrespect to any physicians associates.
Potential individuals concerned.
Absolutely not. But you're replacing people with 10 to 15 years of on-the-job training and a list of exams as long as your arm for somebody with 2 years of training. This is the master plan. You
have knitted together the three originally disparate elements in a quite masterful fashion. Because the physician associates thing was something that I was aware of but hadn't fully understood. But if you are waving goodbye to up to a third of recent graduates, failing to retain and never mind recruit on anything like the necessary scale, and refusing to engage with the workforce in a way that might fix either or any of those problems, then you are left with little choice but to plug gaps with less, let's just simply say, less qualified professionals. And that is what they're doing. So you can't, I mean, it all links, one leads inexorably into the other, doesn't it?
Indeed.
Do all your colleagues understand that? I mean, is that the general consensus among consultants? And
yes, we get it because we see it. Because you see it on the shop floor. If I speak to, I'm a consultant of over 20 years. So if I speak to trainees and I ask them, what are you doing next? What's your plan? Every 1 in 3, 1 in 4 say, I'm off. I've got an offer in Australia, I've got an offer in here, I've got an offer there, and they're off. And they're very good, very capable, very bright young boys and girls. It's a tragedy. And I don't...
That's 2 songs there. You got Blur and then the Bee Gees into that last little contribution.
And I can't blame them because actually their lot is worse than mine.
And that's the whole point, isn't it? The job is considerably less attractive than it was when you went into it. Final question, I promise, because I'm sure you've got better things to do. Is there any possibility that you and your colleagues are suffering from a little bit of in my dayitis, and that actually the introduction of associate physicians and associate what was the word you used? I think it was associate.
Associates.
Might actually be a recognition of a changing reality, or might be a suitable response to albeit that it's not the response you'd like to see. It wouldn't necessarily compromise patient safety.
Got it. So there is an argument to be made for that, but actually when you dig down into that argument, it doesn't make sense financially either, because actually the amount they'll be paying an anaesthetic associate, because they have to be obviously or one of the physician's associates is not going to be far off what you pay a junior doctor. However, those associates are still going to have to be supervised by a consultant,
of course,
because they still need this level of supervision. They won't be paid much less. What they won't be able to do is leave the country. Well, when I say they can't leave the country, is their skills will
their qualifications won't be transferable.
Exactly. So if they went to Australia or I don't know somewhere else or the Middle East and said I'm an anaesthetic anaesthetic associate or whatever the word is, they'll say, well, what is one of those?
Yes. Probably best to make sure that you've established that before you get on the plane. I would have thought, David. Thank you. Listen, some conversations that we have on the programme are in a class of their own when it comes to the amount of light that is shed on an otherwise and a previously complicated issue. And I just want to tell you that yours is categorically in that space. That is such a helpful explanation.
James, can I just make one request from you? Please, can you please keep shining a light whenever they keep talking about people wanting a pay increase?
Yes.
It's to reverse the pay erosion which we've faced. We're not suddenly asking to put up pay 10, 20, 30%. What we're saying is we have, in terms of pay in real terms, the junior doctors and consultants, and there's a graph, I'll try and get it tweeted to you, which was put out by the FT.
I've seen it. It's John Murdoch's work, I think. I've seen it.
Even by comparison to other public sector workers, even though they may have sort of been on lower pay, if you like, but the drop-off in pay has been worse for junior doctors and consultants than anyone else in the public sector, let alone what the private sector has enjoyed. So it's pay restoration. Thank you, James.
And that's not an opinion, that's counting. David, thank you, and I will categorically continue to shine a light on that. I also promise to stop saying categorically quite so much. I seem to have got a bit of a thing going on there. Wow, there's a thing about this job, just give me 30 seconds, right, where one call like that is a reason to do an entire topic. Every call's been brilliant this hour. I'm not suggesting for a minute that it hasn't, but when someone is possessed of the ability to just unpick it and then knit it back together again in that way, nobody listening now is going to reach 11 o'clock without having a much better understanding of the issues currently in play and the potential problems currently on the horizon. And that, oddly, is why I come to work every morning.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:54 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't ordinarily respond to questions about why aren't you talking about X, Y, or Z, but I will today because I think it's actually quite an intelligent question. I'm not taking calls on the Russell Brand issues at the moment for the very simple reason that I can't control what you say. And obviously what you might say is very, very legally sensitive. But in terms of what's going on, then everything that you need to know will be in our news bulletins. If you want some commentary on it, and I might provide my own later in the programme, I certainly not shy of the fact that I interviewed him on more than one occasion in this studio, in fact, or at least in the precursor to this studio. But the two articles I'd recommend, one by Marina Hyde in this morning's Guardian, which is absolutely brilliant in every way, and a superb piece by a journalist called Sam Leith, which was originally published in The Spectator. But if you don't want to click on an organ which contains at least one columnist who's revealed that he couldn't become a teacher because he would have been unable to keep his hands off the pupils, then thankfully it's been reprinted in the Times, so you can read it there. Those are two absolutely superb articles covering pretty much all of the angles that I needed help understanding. So if you want to have a look at either of both of those, then do. At Marina's piece about that Andrew Sachs story in 2008, that probably was the point at which everyone should have given their heads a wobble, and hardly anybody did. I certainly didn't. I remember when the Mail were going after Russell Brand in 2015, I chalked it up as just another example of them going after people they didn't like. It was of a piece with the attacks on Ed Miliband's dead father. I don't know if you remember that, but that was obviously Well, it may well have been the case for the Daily Mail, but obviously it was not a case of there being no smoke without fire, as it often is when they decide to set their sights on somebody. So there's no conscious decision on my part not to talk about this, but there is a deep reluctance to throw the phone lines open at this stage until there is more flesh on various bones. 10:57 is the time. A lot of love coming in for David's explanation of the situation in the NHS. Cliff is in York. You were listening, Cliff. What would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Just wanted to give a slightly different perspective, really. My son is a medical student. He's just starting his fourth year, so he's well past halfway.
Yeah.
And I think your last caller was talking about, 30% of people who are studying looking to leave. I actually think the percentage is much higher than that, listening to my son. He and his cohort are regularly approached by different people from the NHS as they do the training to say things like, would you like to be a GP? We really want you to go into this field or that field. And whenever anybody comes, they all have a chat afterwards. Essentially, the message is we've no real interest, certainly in staying in a lot of the areas. Absolutely.
So this is leaving the NHS within 2 years of graduating.
That's right, because what's also happening, maybe more behind the scenes, but places like Australia and Ireland and America and all the rest of it, there's loads of approaches, loads of places for students to see what's on offer. And I think they're looking very much eagerly at what's going on over here and are looking to poach or certainly encourage a lot of the students to leave. Australia especially.
They've been even advertising. Active. I've seen advertisements that are directed at I mean, the numbers are pretty stark anyway, but before you suggest they might even be higher. It's a big survey, this, undertaken by or published in the British Medical Journal. They surveyed just over a quarter of all UK medical students across 44 medical schools, and 32.5% said they plan to leave the NHS within 2 years of graduating. And you're the least surprised person listening this morning, Cliff.
Absolutely. I mean, my son, he spoke to me about a year or so ago, almost apologetically, by saying that he was looking to leave. What did I think?
Yes.
Because he felt he was going to be letting the NHS down, and he was almost saying to me, am I reading this wrong? What do you think? And I basically said to him, you do what you feel is right, son. I think the way that the medical students are supported, especially the newly qualified. I mean, when he finishes his qualification, James, he'll have been studying at a degree level for 6 years. He'll have done his A-levels and O-level GCSEs, and at best he hopes to get a salary which is less than he could get if he was to be a manager at a local supermarket.
Nothing wrong with being a manager at the local supermarket, but it's the reward for the training that you're referring to, isn't it? What do you think he'll do, incredible. Cliff? Do you know? What do you think he'll do? Yeah,
I don't think there's a doubt in my mind at all that he will be leaving. The only thing is, he hasn't decided what his specialism will be just yet. That's the part of his training now. But Australia is looking favourite. But he's also considering America. What we've got to remember is that the UK medical profession, the training, is world leading, and these are guys who are seen as a massive prize. At the moment, he's seen as a massive prize, and it's a very passportable qualification. So when your last caller was saying things like, I've been in the system for 10, 20 years, I've got a family and I've settled down roots, that's fine, I understand that. But there's a big number of people who are much more flexible in terms of being able to leave.
Of course.
And my fear is that all of the shenanigans that's going on at the moment is going to take away a generation, and I think that'll be much more difficult to fill, James. But there's a massive problem coming with the kids.
I think you're right.
I mean, my son was telling me that they had a guy from the health board who came out trying to encourage people to be a GP. He was in a cohort of 40 students, James, and he basically did his spiel and said, right, who's interested then after you finish your training in being a GP? And out of the whole of the 40, there was only one girl who said, yes, she was intending to be a GP, but it had nothing to do with his speech. It's just that she was following in her father's footsteps. She was going to be the local GP of wherever she lived. But there was absolutely nobody interested whatsoever. The GP side of it, especially, is going to be massively under pressure, James. And
it's all there, and I mean, all the signs are there if you're prepared to look at them. But of course, much of the media is not, and it is upon them that most of us still rely for our information. 2 minutes after 11. Cliff, thank you. Right, cracking little 1-2 at the end there, from David to Cliff, Cliff to David, to me to you to me, and I mean, with a sad sense of knowledge, I think we've all got a better understanding than we had an hour ago. Tell your friends, alert the gammon. We're talking Brexit next.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 6 minutes after 11, and you know that listen, you won't believe me when I say this. I would actually welcome the opportunity never to talk about it again, but in order to do that, there'd have to be some sort of rebuilding of things that we have collectively burnt down together, and you know, it's a 48% ratio, obviously, and more responsibility lies with the 52% than the 48%, but the 48% should have done a better job of explaining to the 52% why it would be a very bad idea to vote to become the first economy in history to impose economic sanctions on itself. So I would like never to talk about it again on one sense. On the other hand, I find it fascinating, both politically and psychologically, and I'm pretty good at telling you what's going to happen next. My favourite Brexit conversations these days are probably the ones to which I don't have good answers. So between 2016 and 2021, I was the worst kind of know-it-all on Brexit. And the worst kind of know-it-all is, of course, a know-it-all who really does know it all, not just someone who thinks they know it all, but someone who is routinely, regularly and repeatedly proved to be right about absolutely everything. But there's no particular pleasure in it. It's like being a weather forecaster, correctly predicting absolutely awful weather. You have to live in the awful weather. You don't get a free pass from a hurricane simply because you were the person who said that the hurricane was coming or described in perfect detail the scientific composition or the circumstances in which the hurricane would occur. So, I mean, here is a prediction for what it's worth about what is going to happen next rhetorically or journalistically. I think that soon it will unhitch itself, depending partly on what happens in the next general election and partly on, which is not a foregone conclusion, whatever people may tell you. But there is, I mean, depending partly on what happens in the next general election, what the Conservatives do to probably recover after a defeat will have a huge impact on what I'm about to predict, which is why I'm not putting it on the list of things that I would call definitive. But I think you're going to have shortly a recognition that people who want to burn more stuff, I think have I heard Farage whining about we haven't diverged enough without, as ever, explaining what that means. Why is he still here, by the way? Has anyone asked him? He said Brexit was a failure a couple of weeks ago, and he said a couple of years ago that if Brexit was a failure, he'd leave the country. It's almost as if you can't trust a word the man ever says. I think there's a Financial Conduct Authority report coming out in the next few days that absolutely blows apart any claims of people being debanked because of their political opinions, but I'll wait until I see the report before we examine that any further. You have people who just want to burn more stuff down. This is really scary, right? Scary, I think, is the right word. Not so much in the context of we should diverge more, because that is now shouting into the ether. Diverge from what? Diverge to what? Follow what regulatory framework instead of the one that British industry has been following for the last 20 years? Impose what rules that we would have to obey in order to export into territories that we don't currently export into already? Why would you want to lower the standards of products being put? So when people say we should diverge more, I want you to understand this, actually. This I am going to put under things that you know it all territory. People who are saying diverge more are the most dishonest grifters in the Brexit debate, because they can't really tell you what they want to diverge from, except things that you wouldn't want to diverge from, which is why they can't tell you. So we want fewer protections for workers. We want fewer penalties in place for corporate malfeasance. We want rich wealth, capital, call it what you will, to have even less restrictions on what it can and can't do. So that's what they mean by diverge. And it doesn't really make any sense, except perhaps in the sort of upper echelons of the hedge fund universe. The problem, the other part of that constituency, the people who just want to carry on burning stuff, are turning their attention next, as you know, to the European Convention on Human Rights, one of Winston Churchill's proudest legacies. And they can't help themselves. It's almost like an arsonist with a psychological problem, as opposed to, you know, just a rational desire to start fires, if there is such a thing. They can't actually help themselves. If you've burnt everything behind you and none of the stuff that you thought would happen has happened, you have very little choice but to carry on setting fire to more stuff that you never actually intended to set fire to in the first place. The mad thing about Brexit is not the failure of the things to get better, not the failure of the improvements that were promised to arrive, the benefits that were described to arrive. It's the measurable decline that has instead occurred. You know, the things that have got worse, obviously worse, whether you're talking about musicians touring, or whether you're talking about the difficulties of exporting, or whether you're talking about the fact that it's still not finished. We still haven't got the measures and checks in place at our ports that will have to be imposed upon goods coming into this country. And when they are imposed, everything gets even worse. There are no benefits. Everybody knows that now. But in order to keep the truth at bay, they say, well, we'll just set fire to one more thing, you see. So I think there's a diverging strand there. The people that are more or less on the same bandwagon are just parting company slightly. You've got the arsonists, and then you've got the idiots. There's a lot of crossover, but the people saying we must diverge more don't know what they're talking about, but they know that their constituency, the people that they've been lying to for decades in some cases, don't stop to ask what they mean. You know, it's like take back control. Don't stop to ask what they mean. We must diverge more. Don't stop to ask what they mean. Just say, yeah, we must diverge more. Yeah, I'm Billy Bunch of Numbers on Twitter with a bulldog avatar, and I believe we must diverge more. Hashtag back Boris. Hashtag never Rishi. Hashtag... And then you've got the slightly more politically successful individuals, people who've actually got jobs in politics, and they will now start talking about the need to set fire to more stuff. What else is there? Is there anything else on that list? The European Convention on Human Rights? We just set fire to more stuff. Set fire to it. And then everything will be all right. Yeah, but you've already burnt loads of stuff and everything's awful. More fire. We need fewer rules governing what can be pumped into our rivers. We need to get rid of the rules that require house builders to actually provide some sort of environmental protections against water. We've already done that. Michael Gove did that. Oh, okay. So burn it. And that passes for political ideology in a Tufton Street flavoured universe. I bet you don't know what question I'm going to ask yet, do you? And for once, I actually do. So you know that things are moving again when the Daily Mail goes for a headline. So the Daily Mail has been publishing columnists now for the best part of 2 or 3 months complaining about broken Britain. They're on my payroll, actually. They're all secretly mustering interest in my imminent volume. It's out in 6 weeks, How They Broke Britain. One thing I was not expecting to happen, I have to be honest with you, when I even finished it not long ago, was the Daily Mail columnists, particularly the one that used to be married to Michael Gove, queuing up to announce that Britain is actually broken. And not just the Daily Mail columnists, a lot of Brexity people, a lot of Telegraph types. Britain is broken. Of course, they're not blaming it on the things that they've done to break Britain. They're blaming it on Liz Truss gave us a masterclass in what they're blaming it on yesterday. They're blaming it on the moonlight. They're blaming it on the sunshine. They're blaming it on the Bank of England. And they're blaming it on the boogie. Oh, and the Labour Party and the media and the BBC. They're blaming it on everything, really, under the sun, except the people whose fingerprints are actually all over the unfolding disaster. So you know things are moving when you get this. Proof you can't trust Starmer on Brexit. OK, what they're scared about now, these pearl-clutching ninnies. As Sir Keir vows to rewrite deal with EU ahead of meeting with Macron today, Tories warn he'll surrender hard-won sovereignty. So, two things occurred to me. The first, some idiot Tory saying wibble, 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 wobble, wibble is not actually proof of anything. A Tory saying he's taking away your sovereignty is not proof that you can't trust Starmer on Brexit. Because the reason why they know that Keir Starmer would like to rewrite our deal with the EU is because Keir Starmer has told them that he would like to rewrite our deal with the EU. Oh, you can't trust him. He wants to rewrite our deal with the EU. How do you know that? He told us. That's not untrustworthy behaviour. If I say to you, I'm going to go to Pret-a-Manger for my lunch, and then you find me in Pret-a-Manger eating my lunch, you can't march up to me and say, that's why I don't trust you, sitting in Pret-a-Manger, eating your lunch. That's why I don't trust you, O'Brien. Yeah. I said, I told you I was going to... How did you know I was going to be here? Well, I heard it on the radio earlier. But how can you not trust me? This is reasons to trust... All right, so that's reason number one. Reason number two is the sheer madness of simultaneously complaining about what's happened and complaining about somebody at least publicly announcing he'd quite like to make things better. Keir Starmer was accused of a Brexit betrayal last night after vowing to rewrite the UK's deal with Brussels. These people are queuing up to complain about the UK's deal with Brussels, and yet vowing to rewrite it is also a problem. He's meeting Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and here's the bit you weren't expecting. It's 16 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and he's wasting his time. We are now entering the period in which the Labour Party come to understand that we are not special. It breaks my heart, this, actually, because I know there's a big Rejoin march unfolding on Saturday, and we'll be speaking to the rather wonderful organiser of it on the programme tomorrow. And I am not going to rain on their parade. Crikey, almost literally. There you go. That's why it's a figure of speech, isn't it? I'm not going to rain on their parade or urinate on their chips. It is an important movement espousing an inevitable outcome. But in terms of where we are now... Well, I'd refer you to a rather splendid piece in the New Statesman today by a man who knows of what he speaks. He's a director of Euro Intelligence, Wolfgang Munchau, and he points out it is simply not possible to achieve a better deal outside of the single market and the customs union. And Keir Starmer is absolutely adamant that we're not going back into the single market or the customs union. So, albeit that the Daily Mail is clutching its pearls, spitting its dummy, whatever you want to call it, I don't know what he should do. And that is possibly the first Brexit phone-in I've launched where I haven't got a clue what I think. What should Keir Starmer do? He is going to France to meet the French president, saying that he wants to secure much better arrangements with the EU. I am quite good on this. I don't think he can. And I'm hoping you might know more about this than I do. 0345 6060 973. Two questions. Is Keir Starmer wasting his time? He is not a thick man, and he is not a blinkered man, but I can't see what he can see here. I really can't. So, question number one, is he wasting his time? Question number two, why is he really in France if the experts are correct and there is no real way of improving the deal that we've got outside the single market and the customs union? Question number three, and this is one for people who are planning on going to the march on Saturday, perhaps in particular, what do you want him to do? And then we'll examine the plausibility of it. I'd like to remind you of one thing before we throw open the phone lines on this. I think it was Bismarck that said this, but don't quote me. Politics is the art of the possible. The art of the possible. We've had a weird period lately where on one side you had people who were promoting the impossible, the electorally impossible, and on the other side you had people who were simply lying about what was possible and then claiming quite dishonestly to have delivered it. So what do you want Starmer to do? Is there any available improvement to the so-called deal with Brussels, which hasn't even been fully implemented yet? And why, if there isn't, is he really in France? We haven't had a good Brexit phone for ages. Keep it clean, all right? 0345 6060 973. It's 11:19.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 11. If you're engaging with this conversation and you want to have a little bit of background from a slightly different perspective to my own, I've just retweeted the beginning of a thread by the rather splendid Mujtaba Rahman, formerly of the Treasury and indeed the EU Commission, which takes a slightly more positive angle on Keir Starmer's trip to Paris, although I'm not sure that in substantive sellable terms there's much there that Keir Starmer could campaign on. It's what you might call an exercise of soft power. But as the right-wing media have a predictable fit of the vapours about Keir Starmer suggesting that having slightly better relations with our nearest allies would be good for a country, I'll say that again, just for the boneheaded and the gammonati. Having better relationships with our nearest allies is always a good thing. I don't believe that there is much available to him in the context of the so-called Brexit deal that has not already been achieved. Tell me why I'm wrong. 23 minutes after 11. Or indeed, tell me what you would like to see, what you want to see Keir Starmer doing. Dave's in Liverpool. Dave, what would you like to say?
Hi James, nice to speak to you again.
Hi, Will.
It's not what I want to see, it's what I feel is actually happening, which is something completely different. Right, in regard to Keir Starmer speaking to people in the EU again, it's a long game. What he's doing is this is what I feel. This is what I feel what he's trying to do. He's trying to make out that he wants to renegotiate if he gets elected on the deal that we have now. As what you've said, because I agree, I don't think he's going to get anywhere. But further down the line, he's going to say, look, we've tried to do this, yet it's not happening. Now, if he got re-elected after 4 years, I would imagine him to say, look, we've got to join the single market.
Second
and
term.
I think that's his long game.
Right. So why are you saying that's not what you want to see? Because that sounds like quite a sensible approach, doesn't it?
No. What I would like to see is we join the European Union again, but that's not going to happen.
But you can't expect him to campaign on that yet, can you? Or can you?
No, what I'm saying is...
I know, I understand what you're saying, but I'm trying to draw the difference between what you want him to do and what you think he's doing, and I'm asking, would you rather he did the thing that you want him to do?
No, I'm not trying to make out anything. I've just stated my stance. I'd like to be in the European Union again. So I'm not knocking what he's doing.
No.
I'm saying this is a political game of chess and a long game. That's what I'm saying.
I do get that. What though will he offer up to people when these conversations are complete as proof that they were worth having? Do you see what I mean?
Yes, and which I have already said. He's going to say, look, I've tried to
this week,
renegotiate.
mate. I mean this week. I don't mean in 4 years' time.
No, I mean now. Now.
So he's going to come back from Paris and say, that was a waste of time.
No, what I'm saying, James, is that will be the ongoing narrative, won't it?
Yes, and what I'm saying, Dave, is what's he going to do this week?
Right, well, what's he going to do this week is what you said, that he's going to go and speak to them and get nowhere.
Right. Well, that's quite odd politics.
And that will be the narrative over 6 years if he gets into power, and after the second election, he's going to say, listen, we need to join the single market.
I'm doing that thing again where I open up a conversation by conceding that I haven't got a clue what is going on, and then I'm being impatient and even perhaps borderline dismissive of people attempting to fill the space that I've created. So, Dave, I apologise. I mean, you could be right. It seems unlikely that he's deliberately setting himself up for failure as part of a long-term plan to do the polar opposite of what he's pledged to doing, i.e. never joining the single market and the customs union. But this is Brexit. This is Brexit where reality goes to die. And who knows what is around the corner. And of course, the renegotiation is not due until 2025, so that might add to Dave's theory, but I don't know what would be available. Look at the things that he's saying that he is going to look at. I don't think I can quite do this off the top of my head, but veterinary stuff is on the list, isn't it? He's going to be looking at, he's trying to improve a third country trade deal. Northern Ireland and Horizon, since it was signed, have actually been resolved. If you don't want to rejoin the single market, if you're ruling out rejoining the customs union, I don't think there is a lot else that you can do that you could chalk up as an improvement to what is already in place. So what do you think Keir Starmer is playing at? 0345 60 973. And am I wrong? Is there actually something he could come back with or achieve that would constitute an improvement to the current arrangements? Jinder is in Chertsey. Jinder, what would you like to say?
Well, I guess now you've asked the second question while I've been on hold.
Yeah, but you can only answer the one that you want. You can answer all of them if you want. It's entirely up to you.
Because originally you said, like, is he wasting his time?
Yeah.
And I'm of the opinion that he is, in the same way that Cameron wasted his time prior to the referendum when he went to the EU and said, "Oh, look, if you don't give us this, then, we might do something."
Mad.
So, what are you going to do?
That was the maddest element, really, of the whole referendum.
It was the whole point. His whole
we had exemptions, we had rebates, we weren't in the single currency, we weren't in Schengen, and the idea that he was going to come back with a substantive, measurable, further detachment, being in but not really being in. Well, he was deluded, I think, yes.
But then it's the same. So Starmer's doing exactly the same thing, but he's just trying to do it on the opposite way and say, well, we've done this now. I'm now going to go back and renegotiate our position, or try to renegotiate our position. Give me a fair crack of the whip. But again, the EU's going to come back and say, well, what are you going to do if we don't? And he's going to say, well, nothing. Because we're already out of the single market. We're already out of the customs union. We're not looking to join. So they're going to attempt to bugger off.
Yes, I'll allow that single profanity to pass, but please, no, that's all right. Please don't repeat it.
But then at the same time, then, if you're saying,
so why is he doing it then? Why is he doing it? Is he as deluded as Cameron?
It's just what politicians do. They've got nothing better to do, have they? I mean, he's got to be seen to be doing something.
Why?
So even if
why?
Because
he's been really careful. Hang on, let me get this out.
He's getting £85,000 a year, isn't he?
No. Because he's been very, very careful to avoid painting a target on his back for the sort of headbanging element of the British media. He will have to at some point. There are some policies that they're going to hate. Trade unions being an early taste, Angela Rayner's speech last week. But if there is no prospect of meaningful achievement, why would he expose himself to the sort of attacks that even going there exposes him to? He might believe that there is a prospect of meaningful achievement.
Well, then if he sees something that basically we all cannot, I'm of the same opinion as you, that he's going to come back empty-handed. And I feel like, in terms of my groups of friends and what I'm reading in the media and the wider spectrum, that's the general consensus. So either he's really, really, really intelligent and we're all thick. No,
I don't know if I'd go that far. But you're right. It does sound a little bit like 3D chess, doesn't it? That he honestly... I like these conversations because they're all grey area, aren't they? There's no black or white. So he could be as deluded as David Cameron, and he thinks that either the unique status of the United Kingdom or his own magnificent negotiating skills will somehow get blood out of a stone. Or he's doing it for reasons that we currently can't discern, which you chalk up as, well, he's got to be doing something, to which I'd respond by saying, well, there's quite a lot of other stuff he could be doing. He doesn't have to be flying to France to meet Emmanuel Macron while promising that he's going to renegotiate the EU deal. And then there's the third possibility, which hasn't been raised yet. Oh, no, there's Dave's possibility, which is, of course, that this is all part of a long-term plan to rejoin, which is what the critics accuse him of and what he denies. But I wonder whether everybody now sits there quietly accepting that probably is the long term. There is no way that we're not going to be back in the single market or the customs union in the next 30 years. But Keir Starmer is not going to be on the political stage 30 years from now. So what exactly is he trying to set us up for? 31 minutes after 11. Thank you, Jinder. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
26 minutes to 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There is a form of consensus emerging, actually. And it's closer to Dave in Liverpool's analysis than mine. Starmer can read the latest Brexit polls as well as anyone else. He's therefore likely seeking to show that the increasing percentage of the electorate that he does intend to start rebuilding bridges with the EU without spooking those yet to be convinced. Small steps. And I like this from Alex in Bishop Stortford. Keir Starmer has secured the red wall, and now he is throwing the Rejoin Brigade a bone. You might be counting chickens there with regard to the red wall, Alex. But Ross adds, this is a strategic move. Starmer is making himself look like a prime minister ahead of the elections. While he won't likely successfully renegotiate the Brexit deal, the narrative will focus on improving relations with the EU. If we can mend fences, we can move closer to rejoining the single market. I think you're all right, actually, and I'm wrong. I think it is making a lot more sense now that we've talked about it and examined it a little further. And Mujtaba Rahman's thread of tweets, which you can see at my account, top of my account, at Mr. James O.B., pursues a very similar line. He says, Labour isn't going to redraw its red lines on customs union and single market, yet. But it would be foolish to bet against that line changing over medium to longer term. So here's the thing. Daily Mail, David Frost in the Daily, he's funny. I know you shouldn't really throw coins at people who are just ridiculous. It feels almost exploitative. But my God, the comment pages of the Daily Telegraph are... There's a guy called Nick Timothy that used to work for Theresa May. You might have heard of him. And a guy called David Frost who negotiated the deal that they then started complaining about before the ink was dry. And a guy called Alistair Heath, who is officially the editor of the Sunday Telegraph. And it's as if they're engaged in a daily competition to write the most absolutely unhinged, unevidenced, reality-free bilge. It's as if Daniel Moylan and Daniel Hannan weren't mad enough. So the Telegraph has decided to try to find three people who will write even more mad stuff. And they've got colleagues who, I haven't even looked at it today. They've got colleagues who rise to the challenge every day of making them feel comfortable. So I'm going to find the comment pages of the Daily Telegraph today. I'm going to read you the first headline that I see, and you can decide whether or not my depiction there of everyone who writes on this part of the paper as being absolutely hat stand is fair or not. Okay, I'm now looking down for the first time today. I might see James O'Brien is a brilliant broadcaster, and the sooner that we recognise that, the better for all concerned. Then I'm going to look like a right lemon, aren't I? Or I might encounter something so unutterably crazy that you'll think, crikey, yeah, I thought you might have been exaggerating. But so what am I going to see as I look down now at page 14 of the Daily Telegraph? You ready? Oh boy. Truss is right, but must she stand alone in the right for freedom? You thought I was exaggerating, didn't you? That is indeed by someone called Sherelle Jacobs. And here is Frost as well on the same page. The government is paving the way. Let me say this more slowly, actually. The government is paving the way for Labour's great Brexit betrayal. Wow. So, trying to unravel that in a way that might make immediate sense to you. Things are going so badly that they're just sort of going, blame Labour, blame the civil service, blame the wokerati, blame the tofu-eating mob, blame the civil... blame, because you can't acknowledge that things are going so badly as a consequence of what you did. And that's the environment in which Starmer is operating. So right now, Starmer's not going to give an inch to the people who are already claiming, despite him saying daily that he's not going to do the thing that they say he's going to do, he's not giving them an inch. But he has to actually be statesmanlike. And being statesmanlike involves talking to people like Emmanuel Macron. So the more we talk about it, the more sense it makes, until you dial 0345 6060 973 and expertly dismantle the narrative that we've just assembled. Adam is in Dalsland in Sweden. Adam, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I think Keir Starmer's main focus right now is winning the election. And everything he chooses to do is with that in mind. He's gone over to France, or he's going over to France to talk to Emmanuel Macron, the head of France, because back home he's going to look like the future PM.
Yes.
Then the French press are going to discuss it, and his name recognition is going to start to increase in other areas across the pond, across the channel. I also think that he has a couple of by-elections coming up, and at least one of them he's going to be fighting the Lib Dems. And in order to potentially,
So it's all
get in the
pragmatism.
mind of,
I'm never 100% sure on what the rules are about talking about by-elections or whether we're in a period of purdah or not. So I always err on the side of caution. So so you're talking about weapons-grade pragmatism, Adam, really?
Yeah,
and that's
I think
a good
thing. His attack lines in PMQs are now, Richie Sunak is in action man.
Yeah.
And I'm doing things. I'm going out there. I'm discussing what should be done with the country. I've already discussed in my
That's a really good point, actually.
So
Rishi Sunak can't go to France to talk to Emmanuel Macron about improving the current situation because he would be he'd be lynched by his own party and by the
exactly.
So Starmer can. So this is the fascinating bit, isn't it? The idea that he is trying to simultaneously placate people who recognise the necessity of rebuilding bridges and people who are still spooked by the idea of returning to of crossing the bridge, as it were.
Yeah, I'd say he's doing a pretty good job at it.
Well, I would now you've explained it like that because, you can take what he says and what he does in two slightly different ways. We are definitely not joining the customs union and the single market, but we are floating the possibility, we are opening the door to the possibility of improved relations. Whether they're achievable or not, my willingness to pursue them, my desire to pursue them is politically relevant.
Yeah, he's being perceived as the person who is putting Britain's best foot forward. Not Richie Sunak.
Yeah, no, I get it. I like it a lot. Well, just out of interest, when other EU countries, I presume that we're a bit of an afterthought now or a bit of a curiosity when it comes to coverage. But this idea that we could somehow get special dispensations denied to other third countries, is that something that gets any traction outside the UK?
I haven't seen anything in Sweden about that, but I imagine that because everybody understands that it was craziness to leave the EU, that people also seem to understand why we left the EU and that it was, the populism and everybody got riled up, that if certain dispensations were given to Britain, a previous member, a member that's, the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world, I can't imagine that there would be too much fuss made. Maybe some countries that are looking to join the EU might be a little bit annoyed, but I think overall there is an understanding that
more pragmatism really is what you're describing. Pragmatism from the other side of the bridge. Thank you, Adam. That's really interesting. Listen, you are welcome to poo-poo all of this. I wasn't expecting a consensus to emerge because rather embarrassingly I was coming at this from a place of genuine ignorance, and there'll be plenty of people perhaps planning to march on Saturday who aren't happy about the nature of this conversation because you do genuinely want to be back in tomorrow for perfectly reasonable reasons. The damage that has been done to your business or your life or your future or your children's future is considerable. And just because people like Frost, the sort of three musketeers of idiocy, Alistair Heath, David Frost and Nick Timothy, just because they're still sort of, I don't know, what do they, how would you even describe it? You are not ready to play this waiting game and wait for the madness to recede before reality can once again impose itself on the United Kingdom. John's in Bolton. John, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, John.
Lovely to talk to you again.
Likewise.
You may remember I'm the guy who's half English, half Norwegian.
Of course,
Spoke
yes.
to you a couple of months ago.
Indeed, yes. I've thought of little else since.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
What would you like to say?
Very kind to say.
Right.
I've just come across UK in a changing Europe.
Yes, it's very
They're
good.
having an open talk at 1:00 today. You can find it on Eventbrite. So that's one thing. And the subject is, can the EU-UK trade agreement be renegotiated? Bang, crash, wallop, straight on the nose.
Well, it is, yeah, but that's no good. That's someone else asking the same question. What's the answer?
Hang on. Of course Starmer can't renegotiate it. Of course he can't. He's got things he can gain. Political kudos.
Yes.
By talking to the other leaders.
Yes.
Looking like he's trying to the Remainers and the Rejoiners.
Yes.
Status in the UK, because he's starting to look more like a PM than Sunak is.
This is true.
Starting to take power. Now, he's a leading politician. Power is in their eyes. You can see it glittering in their eyes.
Yes.
And it's scary. It's really scary when people get that look.
But why? I mean, you can't not want power without looking like you want power, can you?
Personal power. Remember,
okay, you've gone off piste a bit there.
Personal power.
Yes.
James.
Okay. What do you see in his eyes then? What are we? I'm not being funny, but what?
I don't know, because the guy keeps changing his mind. You know, he was Remain. Now he's Brexit.
Well, he's
now
not.
He's EU. He's going all over the place. So he's trying to bamboozle everyone.
Well, I disagree with you there, but only insofar as the last caller made the case for weapons-grade pragmatism. He knows that we were better off inside. I don't find this difficult, John. I used to, but I'm not in politics, so I don't have to. I don't have to cut my cloth according to democratic results. I can continue to argue for what I believe in. Yeah. You can think that you can know that we were better off in every measurable way inside the European Union and accept that we voted to leave, and therefore it is a generational issue to go back. I don't think that's changing your mind.
No. That's the bit I can see, though. It's scary when one person has total power. Because the Prime Minister in the UK, if they have a majority in the House of Commons, they can do exactly what they want.
If it's big enough, they can. Yeah, I take that. I know it's a bit off-piste, as I said. You've sort of gone off on a bit of a tangent from where we were before, because it's a critique of the electoral system that you're offering us, or the unwritten constitution, rather than the question of whether what Keir Starmer is doing now is good or bad. So who's going to hate it? People that are going to hate him whatever he does. The only people that are going to have a problem with Keir Starmer talking to Emmanuel Macron are the people who believe the bilge that is written by the three musketeers of idiocy and their mates. I mean, there's loads of them. There's more than three. It's a bit unfair to single them out, although it is, of course, a diminishing number, just massively, massively overrepresented in British newspapers. So who's going to have a problem with what Keir Starmer is doing outside of the constituency whose brains were boiled years ago by the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph or the Daily Express? Answer: nobody. And he's never going to win their votes. There are no circumstances that rump, that 15, 20, 25%, whatever it is, who have got their blue scarf tied so tightly around their neck that no oxygen has reached their brain since 1979. He's never going to win those votes. So they're the only people that are going to be hacked off with this. What about the rejoiners? Are you unhappy with this sort of softly pragmatic approach? It is 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:51 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm marching on Saturday, James. I don't expect to be back in the single market or the EU anytime soon, but it's important to show that the pro-EU movement is not going away. Tess writes, Starmer is simply trying to fix the Brexit mess, thank goodness. And this is good, actually. I think, of all people, I probably should have remembered this. That full disclosure you did with him, James, he said that he sees a problem, that when he sees a problem, he tries to fix it, instead of walking around pointing at the problem. I think he wants to know exactly what is possible and what could have been done differently, and start from there. Quite a very warm atmosphere for him, actually. Whilst I accept that Keir Starmer may be playing a long game, explicitly saying that he is not looking to join the single market and the customs union is unnecessary. This is less warm. It is also the reason I left the Labour Party. They've been all over the place on this issue, trying to placate the same EU-hating minority that the Tories did. I do find it a bit odd that you stayed in the Labour Party while it was being led by someone who wanted to leave the European Union, as Diane Abbott disclosed on the Newsagents podcast not long ago. But I understand your unhappiness. He could have left it out. He doesn't have to have gone that far. Whatever it takes to improve the daily life of the British electorate, he will do. And that begins with closer relations with our nearest neighbours. I think I disagree. I think if he doesn't rule out joining the single market and the customs union, then he plays into the hands of the idiots. And look, we live in a country where the idiots have way more power than they should. Largely because of the people that feed them every day, the people that spoon feed them, bile and distraction and othering every single day. And Alan makes an excellent point from Wandsworth. The fact that Macron is taking the meeting is a huge, and Alan used to work in the Labour movement, actually. He's included his surname at a high level. The fact that Macron is taking the meeting is a huge sign that he thinks there is a very real chance that he will be dealing with Starmer as PM in a year or so's time. And that, that's significant as well, isn't it? John's in Cambridge. John, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. Well, to be honest, I think a lot of what I was going to say has now been covered. But I'm thinking that Starmer's doing this really for the home market, to be honest, and his supporters in particular. Because as far as I can see, there's a huge amount of criticism going his way.
Well, not today. But he's put a lot of work into what you might, I think, if you were feeling unkind, you could describe it as appeasing the enemy. So promising
No,
he has. I know you're not. You know what I was saying. If I'd finished saying it, he has put a lot of work into appeasing what his supporters would see as the enemy, and now he's throwing them some bones.
Well, I think he has to, really, because as far as I can see, he's probably losing a hell of a lot of support from potential Labour voters as going on the way he has been.
Okay. The polls completely contradict that, of course.
I don't know. I mean,
it's not an opinion, John. It's counting.
Yeah. I mean, social media.
Yeah.
And I know a fair few activists in this town, and a lot of them are seriously unhappy about it, and are talking about voting for anybody else but Starmer.
So because of EU-related concerns?
Absolutely, totally. Yeah.
So they'd vote Lib Dem then, I suppose.
They would vote
because it's not anyone else. They're not going to vote UKIP, are they, or Tory?
Well, unfortunately, some of them will vote Green and throw their vote away. But I mean, in this town.
You might be right. You might be right. He might be dancing to the tune of his critics rather than his supporters. But it seems unlikely to me. But there's only one party. Well, there are two parties that can deliver closer relations with the European Union, and he leads one of them. Rishi Sunak leads the other one. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The absolute what's it called when you sort of throw something disruptive? What's the figure of speech for? It's not quite a spanner in the works, but the real rabbit out of a hat, or the real shock to the system, would be a Conservative leader, possibly even the next one, doing the pivot first. The Conservative leader who turns around and says, look, ideally someone who was quite a vocal supporter of leaving the European Union, ends up leading the Tory party after Rishi Sunak and says, look, we've given it our best shot, we were wrong. It was a mistake. What would that do to UK politics? Immediately put Labour onto the back foot, cast Labour as the ones that want to cling to the sinking carcass of Brexit, cast the Conservatives as the modern forward-looking party that are admitting their own mistake and getting ready to rectify it, and, well, who knows, completely drive a coach and horses through old-fashioned notions of footballification or sort of blinding loyalty. I like it. As a theory, God knows what would happen if it happened. Sandy is in Palma in Spain. Sandy, what would you like to say?
Hello. First of all, you've got to mention the name of your book before you finish, because I've ordered it and they don't know what to look for in the bookshop.
Okay. How They Broke Britain, Sandy.
Oh, thank you.
There you go. Carry on. Excellent work.
And with Keir Starmer, bless him, he's playing the long game. And I think he's trying to keep as many votes as possible, because Europeans, God bless them, the ones that are still pro-Europe, he's going to try and keep their votes because it's going to be a close call, I think.
It might be a lot closer than some people think, and the next year might see a narrow. Is it working? I mean, is he managing to placate the people that want to rejoin and not spook the people who either don't think now is the time or who even perhaps don't want to?
It's a long game.
Yes,
if you think back how the Brexit people were sort of going on for 20-odd years to get the result they wanted, Rejoin's going to have to do the same.
Yeah.
I mean, it's too late for me. I'm Spanish now.
Are you really?
Which is a result of Brexit.
Do you feel any different when you wake up in the morning?
I feel sad, to be honest.
Oh, I'm sorry,
not sad that I'm Spanish.
No.
But sad
that it's come to that.
That it's come to that. I mean, I'm grateful that they've taken me in.
Yes.
But you've got to come back. It's like dragging a toddler screaming on the second day of nursery. It'll happen.
It is.
But it'll be baby steps. It'll be,
So
I don't know what to say, really.
No, you're mildly approving of what he's doing then?
Well, what other alternative is there?
There is the killer question, Sandy, all the way from Spain. Oh, was it your sister? Did you talk to me about your sister at some point? How's she getting on?
She's not doing very well.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry to hear that.
She had an operation in the summer that she paid for because she panicked.
Oh, bless her.
So I've been over.
Oh, Sandy, I didn't mean to bring up that unpleasantness. But I know that you were...
No, it's just sad because when I see what could be or what could have been and what is...
Yes. Well, she could be with you, couldn't she, if it wasn't for Brexit?
She could have.
That was what you told me last time, I think.
But it's not going to happen.
No.
So...
Can see why.
It's just...
Not fair.
I don't understand why you've done it, to be honest. I just don't understand.
No, nor do I, actually. But at least, as you say, we'll have to go backwards at some point, won't we? We'll have to. Yes. We'll have to fix it at some point. Give my love to your sister, won't you?
I'm Spanish. They can't throw me out here. Not that I think they would.
I wasn't expecting the Spanish Inquisition, Sandy, but here you are. You look after yourself.
Take care and keep us all sane, please.
I'm trying. Thank you for that. It is coming up to 12 noon, and it's funny the calls that stick in your mind. I remember Sandy's sadness about the fact that she couldn't look after her sister in Spain because of the rules governing what UK citizens and how much time UK citizens can and can't spend in the European Union anymore. She's had to take up citizenship herself. I think you could tell from her tone or why that resonated with me and why that stayed with me for, I think it's about 18 months since we last spoke. It's coming up to 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got a mad one for you next. I'll give you the broad brush strokes, all right, because the detail of it is almost impossible to believe. Imagine if you were a sperm donor and then 18 years later there was a knock on the door. Well, that could be happening soon.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12 is the time. Apologies to Gethin, who's in Anglesey, who has tweeted me with several asterisks, saying, bleep me, James, I'm fixing a boiler and that lady from Spain just made me cry. Keep it up. Well, we have to, don't we, for people like Sandy? And so we will, albeit that there are days of frustration that people like Keir Starmer aren't moving to return to reality a little quicker, the pragmatism. That's why I began, didn't I, that last hour, by reminding you that I think it was Otto von Bismarck who said that politics is the art of the possible. Right, here's an interesting one. I have absolutely no idea who is going to phone me between now and 1 o'clock. I've got some sort of inklings, but it's perfectly possible nobody would. It's perfectly possible nobody will. Because the question I'm going to ask, well, I'm not entirely sure what it is yet, but it was just a headline. Out of all the headlines that I saw today, this was the one that grabbed me the hardest. And it is this. Here is the headline. First sperm donor kids are set to track down their dads. I don't know what the odds are of someone listening to this programme who is actually in the story. I think it would be slightly inappropriate to get Ray Liotta out if you are in this category. But if you want a Ray Liotta and you are one of these children, then you can have one by all means. Thousands of children born from sperm donors will be able to track down their biological fathers in the coming weeks. The first youngsters who were affected by changes to the anonymity law in 2005 turn 18 in October and can ask for the identities of their donor parent. Now, obviously, we can't confine this conversation to people directly and personally affected, but we can certainly include that, focus on that first. The bigger question is whether or not this was a terrible mistake. I don't know. And I come at this from a slightly different angle from most people because I was adopted as a tiny baby. I was adopted at 28 days old. And to the confusion of many people in my life, I've never felt any particular urge to track down my biological parents. Most obviously, I think my biological mother. And I don't know the reason for that, except insofar as I have never felt that there is any hole in my life. I have never felt any lack, any vacancy, any vacuum that hasn't been filled completely by my own parents. My dad no longer with us. My mum very much still with us. And the problem that I have with saying that is that it makes it sound, you could construe from me saying the reason I've never tracked down my biological mum is because my mum has done such a brilliant job of making me feel loved. And that means that to another adoptive person who loves their mum, it sounds as if I'm saying, your mum hasn't done as good a job as mine. So that's why I'm uncomfortable having that bit of the conversation these days. I didn't used to be. I didn't used to think about other people's feelings quite as much as I do these days. But there's a judgment involved in that statement. I say, especially if you're adopted and you do have a desire to see or to find your biological parents, your biological forebears, you hear me say, well, I don't, because my mum loves me so much. You think that I'm saying your mum doesn't love you as much as my mum loves mine, and I don't know that that's true, and I'm sure it isn't. But many adopted people feel an overwhelming need to make a connection with their biological ancestry, and I don't. When I was in therapy, you're never really out of therapy, but my therapist was sceptical. She was absolutely certain that the more work we did, the more it would emerge that I did have some sort of, so I think they call it an abandonment issue. And by the time we finished working together, she admitted that I just didn't. It just wasn't there. It was just literally the first adopted person she'd ever worked with who just genuinely didn't have it. So that I'm not mentioning that for any particular reason other than to let you know that I do have some perspective on this urge that you might feel as someone raised by parents who are not your biological, because you'd be raised probably by one biological parent, wouldn't you, if you're the child of a sperm donor, but you want to know more about the sperm donor. I'm going to begin by saying, for the reasons that I've just explained, I don't really get it, okay? 0345 6060 973. And when it happened in 2005, we were on air, but I'm not sure I had the confidence to get stuck into stories as ethically complicated or as personally emotive as this one. So I don't think we ever did this specifically. I think it's a really silly law. There are still exemptions. About 1,800 babies have still been born using an anonymous donor since 2005. But I mean, the idea that you can now be expecting a knock on the door 18 years later, you'll be a completely different person. You may never have told your current partner that you donated sperm. Do you know, I know these are not rhetorical questions, if you've donated sperm, I'd love to get a little bit more information from you. Do you know whether or not it has succeeded? Do you get told? So if you donate sperm, do you get told whether or not a woman has successfully conceived? So you know that there's, because what's that like? 0345 6060 973. And what do you think? And I guess in the first instance, it's going to be a heck of a lot more interesting to hear from people with a connection to these issues, even a deeper connection than mine. What's it like knowing that you've got a child out there who you have absolutely nothing to do with, not through any moral failing on your part or any, removal from a life that already existed, because of course when you donated sperm, no lives existed. Even if the conception was successful, no lives existed at that point. The point of birth, you become a parent. Crikey, it's a mad story, right? What's the reasoning behind it? The idea that you would no longer be anonymous, and that this year, you could be contacted by someone who you are the biological parent of. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. We're good at this, by the way, if you're worried or if you're new to the programme. We're strangely good at navigating this sort of territory together, largely because I think you hold my hand so tightly and I listen so carefully to what you have to say. So I've already been a little bit glib by saying that I don't get it. There's no way this would have been introduced without at least justification, rationale and careful thought. But you're looking at around 10,000 people by the end of the decade who will have the right to track down the man, to contact the man who provided the person who's just made me giggle with their text knows exactly who they are, but there is no earthly way that I'm reading that text out on the programme. Stop it. The person who donated sperm from which you were born you will be able to contact. So how do you feel about that as a donor, or how do you feel about that as a consequence, if you like, of a donation? I just find it really interesting, and I'm sure you will as well, but I think a lot of my interest has to do with my own relationship with having biological parents in whom I have very, very little interest. The other reason why I wouldn't do it, why I haven't done it, why I never will do it, is because I then become a hand grenade in somebody else's life. You know, I know there are ways of doing it and letters get sent. I don't really want this conversation to be about adoption, by the way. I want it to be specifically about this issue. I don't think I almost don't believe you have the right to turn up in the life of somebody whose partner, whose children, whose other children may not even know that you exist, and detonate that emotional explosive in the middle of their existence. But again, now I'm sounding as if I'm being critical or judgmental about people who've done it, and I really don't want to do that. I respect your different attitude to this story completely. I'm not by any way legislating for anybody else. I'm simply sharing my own thoughts and feelings on an issue that I don't think I can really wade into without disclosing my own perspectives on it, because my level of interest in it is formed slightly by my own background. This is a very important landmark, says Dr. Marta Jansa Perez from the British Fertility Society, for those people who were conceived by the use of donor eggs or sperm, so forgive me, it's eggs as well, since 2005, as when they reach 18, they will be able to receive identifiable information about their donors. And the fact that you can get full name, date of birth, last known address, no financial or legal obligation. But I guess the first question I'd ask is whether or not there is in fact some sort of emotional obligation. If somebody turned up on my doorstep now, even though I was fully cognizant of the anonymity, how do you process the emotion? Not the money, not the legal side of it, but is there an emotional heft there? It's a crazy one, right? Absolutely crazy conversation for people who have no personal angle on it whatsoever, and even for those of us that do. Which side of the door are you on? Which side of the door are you imagining being on now? The person knocking on the door or the person opening the door? I'll take anything you've got on this, actually. It was probably a mistake to say that I don't want to talk about adoption as well, because that's very relevant too. But let's focus first on donation. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I promise to be sensitive. That's the very, very, very least I can do in these sort of circumstances. It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:17. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I already said this, Buster. I said I won't be giving out Ray Liotta's because it's far too sensitive a subject. But there's no need to. Everyone's a critic these days. Everyone's a producer, actually, these days, whispering advice in my ear. Crazy topic, I think. Headline fairly self-explanatory. First sperm donor kids are set to track down their dads. There's another question here which we probably won't have time for today. Whether or not the notion of a sperm donor feels differently from a donor egg. And it does to me, bizarrely. I don't know why. And it does to that headline writer as well. But that's probably not for today. It's probably just because I'm a bloke. John's in Wembley. John, what made you pick up the phone?
Because you're having a conversation about me, James. I donated sperm when I was at university in 1992 to pay my rent. I mean, it really was to pay my rent. And was told at the time that categorically there was no way anybody could contact me unless a High Court judge decreed that I had withheld information about my genetic background.
Oh, okay.
So, had I been told, and medical professionals are telling me the same thing, had I been told that they would have a chance of tracking down, and of course I realised they didn't realise that Ancestry.com and the like were coming about, but had I been told they would, then I wouldn't have done it. And
whoa. Is that what? Well, you carry on, mate. Take all the time you want.
So, a couple of years ago, I read an article. Well, first of all, I went on Ancestry.com in, I don't know, 2012, something like that, to ostensibly, because at that time it was a little laugh to find out whether you were a Viking or...
Yeah. Had you forgotten about the sperm donation, more or less?
No, I hadn't forgotten about it, but I didn't put... I mean, and it sounds incredibly naive.
It doesn't at all. You
didn't put two and two together.
No.
You just... I mean, that was a... And thankfully, my wife knew. I had been very clear with her about it all at the very beginning. I was told by the hospital that they could create 10 children from my sperm.
Right.
But
you get no information afterwards about whether that has happened or not.
I had no information afterwards. What's more, they told me at the time that one of the advantages was if I should ever need fresh sperm from myself in the future, then I could get it from them because they'd always keep too much.
So if you got some form of cancer or something like that and it rendered you infertile, you'd have installed.
And when I was struggling to have a second child and we were going through IVF, I thought, well, hang on a second here, my 20-year-old sperm is a lot better than the sperm that has been damaged by my life since.
Yes.
And I phoned them up and they said, oh no, we destroyed it all.
Oh.
So my massive anger. Well, I'll go on because it's quite a drawn. But then in about 2 years ago, I read an article in the newspaper which highlighted my concerns about Ancestry.com.
The genealogy website. Yeah.
And I was like, and so I spoke to my wife about it again. Then she was deeply unhappy about the whole thing. Massive pressure on a marriage. And then about 3 or 4 months ago, I got a letter in the post from a therapist, and I'm actually a therapist myself, but from a therapist who brokers these meetings. And cut a long story short, it turned out that one of the people born of my donation answered an ad for a documentary company who are looking to hunt down and reunite donors with their kids, and so approached me through, and the production company got her on board and basically tracked me down.
Okay.
And it led to, a very odd, very stressful situation at home. I'm not taking part in the documentary in any way. I've told them I don't want anything to do with it. And I did write a letter to the person who was born of my donation, a long letter, trying to answer some of her questions. But the point is that there's a lot of wrapping up and protection. I mean, Tony Blair did it in 2005. Lots of protection of the donor kids, which I totally accept.
Yes.
But I feel completely marginalised in this situation. I feel like I've been exploited. The company, no one's ever phoned me or no one's ever contacted us from the Human Embryo Fertilisation Authority. No one's ever contacted anybody to say this might happen or it's a problem. Eventually, when I saw that article in The Guardian, I sent an email to them asking for a list to know how many children were born of my donation.
Right.
2 years later, they responded. They had the temerity to respond. 2 years it took them. And when they did, it didn't even count the person who's just contacted me. So they've told me there are 14. Well, I know there are 15, but I now question. At the start, they told me there could only be 10. They've told me there are 14. There's a 15th that I've subsequently met, and so I have not met, but been in contact with.
Become aware of.
I have no idea how many there really are. I feel completely commoditized. I feel, and it's a very, we are not people who disappear into hospitals and do their business in a pot are not a group that people care about very much or feel sorry for. It's interesting what you said about egg donation versus sperm donation.
Yes.
Because we were the spotty students who went in and did I was paying my rent. I literally was paying my rent.
And can I clarify a couple of things, John? So what you're describing is not having really given much thought at all to the consequences of what you were doing, but simultaneously not thinking that you really needed to, because there was no way that this was ever going to come back into your life in any way, shape or form.
That's what as an 18-year-old boy I was repeatedly told by medical professionals. And beyond that, when I did get to an age where I did think about it, which is, of course, when I did get then I felt good about the fact that I was helping a family who didn't have kids, and that was that.
And the second thing to clarify, this has only happened because of you putting your DNA on the website. Is that right?
Yeah.
And
but the other aspect of that.
No, I understand that. I just wanted to be clear.
Well, but the other aspect of that is, of course, when we realised this was a threat, my wife's first thing was, "We'll take your stuff off there."
Yes.
And I said, "I can't, because if I do, then what happens is these people will contact Uncle Jimmy or anyone else in my family who they have a connection with. Did you know someone who was at X university?" And so I have to leave it up, because the last thing in the world I want is them approaching anybody else in my family, because no one else in my family knows about it.
Siblings or cousins or parents or anything.
Exactly.
And forgive me for this question, and tell me to butt out if anything gets too intrusive, but why has your wife taken it so badly? Is it because of your own fertility issues?
No, we've got family, we've got kids ourselves, and that's all good. She, I think, is nervous about breaking up our family unit. Something coming into it that might be unpredictable. So she's uncomfortable about it, which I understand.
I do as well now. I just wanted to ask. I've not encountered anything like this before. And what do you feel? I don't suspect you feel any particular curiosity or affinity, do you? Or possibly curiosity, but no affinity.
Well, no. I mean, I do. I mean, I do feel curiosity and affinity.
Do you?
Probably more than I probably should.
Okay.
And no, I'm not these people's father.
No.
I'm 100% clear, because fatherhood is 10 billion times more than the donation of sperm.
It's a lifelong commitment as well.
Exactly. So I'm not, and just as an empathetic human being, I care. I don't want. So
you don't want to be responsible for somebody else's trauma by not wanting.
No, exactly. So I wrote a very long and detailed letter, and I did say that I was angry with these aspects, not with the individual, but angry with these aspects of it all. But was at pains to make it clear that I didn't hold her responsible for any way in that.
That was good of you. And where are we now? You just live in a sort of...
waiting for the next one.
Really?
Yeah, pretty much.
And how many did you say there'd been already?
Well, I know... they told me there are 14.
But you've only been contacted by one. You've only been contacted...
who's also the oldest. But I don't know. I mean, she at the time, the Human Embryology and Fertilization Authority gave the advice to parents of donor-conceived children not to tell them they were donor-conceived.
Right.
So a lot of these kids won't even know.
No. And then until they go on one of these websites.
It's just... It is. Nobody has taken any responsibility. I mean, the ATFA, that is their sole existence. Their sole existence is to protect donors and donor conceived. That is their sole role. I'd be fascinated to know how much money the NHS made out of it, because we didn't. I mean, I was paid £12 a shot, for Christ's sake. So I was fascinated to know how much money the NHS made out of it. I'm also fascinated to know whether why they haven't been more proactive. Why are they not lobbying on behalf of donors? Why aren't they going to the government and saying you need to make sure that there are routes for anonymity that can be upheld? Or at the very least, a letter out to me saying, look, this is what happens. This is how we normally deal with it. This is the sort of things you should say.
And even on a more simplistic level, for the genealogy sites to stick up a massive flag saying, don't forget, if you were a sperm donor in your student days, that this would be something you might want to think very, very deeply about.
Even then, it doesn't stop it, because, as I say...
They'll find your flipping siblings. God.
Exactly.
Here, I'll read you something. And then ask you to respond, which is that this is the Daily Mirror's reporting. The law change came about after studies on adopted and sperm donor-conceived children found they benefited emotionally from knowing who their biological parents were. I guess the concern and your reality is that it won't just stop at knowing, will it?
Well, I wholly agree with that statement.
Yes.
But I was promised categorically at the time. Had I been told, there's a chance they'll get in touch with you, then it would have been down to me. I would have made a decision, yes or no, on that front. I actually would have said no.
But you've been hijacked by the technology, haven't you? You've been hijacked by the genealogy. I mean, I understand you're cross with the NHS and you're cross with the people that took your sperm, but really it was a hijack by the genealogy technology, which no one really foresaw back in the day. Oh, mate.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it's fine. I mean, of course, the worst things happen at sea, but
still, I mean, it's a pure. It's what I said a moment ago from my own perspective as an adopted child of being a hand grenade in somebody else's existence, and that's just kind of what's happened to you, isn't it?
Yeah. But yes, so.
So there it is. All of the repercussions. I'm very glad to hear
you talking about it. I'm very glad to hear you talk about it because I do, and I've thought about whether I go and lobby or do whatever. But the notion of putting your head above the parapet and saying,
"Well, how do you do it though? What could you change here? I mean,
I don't know.
No, nor do I.
Bring awareness to. I just think that donors have been quite understandably marginalised to an enormous degree.
Yeah, and yet you have to deal with some fairly hefty emotional turmoil in your life as a consequence of the prioritisation of all of the other people, all of the other human beings in this story. John, thank you, mate. It can't have been easy, but I'm glad that you said at the end it's pleasing to you that it's being talked about, that it's out there. That was, frankly, a story I was not. I said at 12 o'clock, I don't know who's going to call me today, and I think John's just proved it beyond all reasonable doubt. Take care, mate, seriously. Amelia Cox is here now with your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 12 is the time. A lot of love for John coming in. What a great human being, writes this tweeter. I could cry for the dilemma he finds himself in. I think this, and we'll address this now, I think this will stop donations for future families struggling with fertility. I gave that some thought before we came on air today, or before we decided to do this, and it categorically won't, you see, because the thousands of children who will be in this category by the end of the decade were conceived from sperm or eggs donated by people completely cognizant of the fact that this could happen in the future. It's a crucial distinction, this. John is a victim, and I use that word advisedly, of entirely unforeseen and unforeseeable circumstances, i.e. the explosion of genealogy websites and the fact that DNA can be identified and matched in a way that nobody expected or foresaw at the time when he signed up to donate sperm, when he made his donation. So there is nothing about these conversations that will put other people off being donors, because you cannot be a donor today without knowing that this could happen in the future. There are exemptions, which I don't fully understand. About 1,800 babies have been born using an anonymous donor since 2005. 1,800, a relatively small number in the great scheme of things. Now, they could find themselves in the same situation as the people finding John, or, of course, that was the point, wasn't it? Or his sisters, brothers, siblings, cousins, parents, looking for the match. This is a 50% match. You share a grandparent with this person. I mean, and so that also and almost completely takes away the advice not to go on these sites in the first place if you are in this category. Whew. And that's very different from being adopted, because you don't find anybody close to me by finding someone biologically close to me on a genealogy website, because neither of us know that the other one exists until you put your DNA on the genealogy website, which I haven't done. Not because I'd thought it through in any way, shape or form. I was quite keen to know what percentage Viking I was. But there it is. Mark's in Margate. Mark, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I just thought I'd give you the other side of the story, I guess, from my perspective. I've recently discovered that I'm a donor-conceived person.
Okay.
I'm 36. And it was a few months ago I got the results of a DNA test that I actually got given as a Christmas gift for a bit of fun. And I matched with some half-siblings who told me that, in fact, I've basically discovered I had 4 half-siblings.
Yeah.
And they explained that they were all linked because they had a donor, and I didn't initially believe it. So yeah, from kind of believing, for 36 years that I grew up with my biological dad, and then all of a sudden discovering that it's not.
Yeah.
It leaves it kind of, obviously it's a shock initially, but it it leads to a lot of questions, and this idea of kind of 50% of me comes from somewhere that, a person that I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's through that, I don't know, I'm just trying to give you a sense of why.
No, that's turmoil.
Like
you're describing
myself,
turmoil.
It's the kind of human desire to know where you come from, and
Yes.
and that's that's kind of just the perspective I want to
No,
get across.
of course you do, particularly in the circumstances where what you thought you knew you didn't know for 34 years, 35 years.
Yeah, 36.
36 years even. Well, I'm working on the principle you didn't really understand what was going on when you were 2 years
true.
old. No, I'm
Didn't know
joking.
what's going on there.
Is your dad still with us? Is
No, he passed away a couple of years ago.
Oh, mate.
So, yeah.
And did you, again, as with John, if I ask any questions you don't want to answer, just tell me to sod off, all right?
Yeah, so good.
Did you have a good relationship with your dad?
Yeah, it's good.
Well, no one can ever take that away from you, Mark. He did the parenting. He did the dadding.
Yeah. I know, and the kind of the search in a way, because I would like to know.
Have any of your half siblings made contact? Are any of them interested in tracking down the biological,
the
donor?
Meet them all. I've met them all a couple of times now.
What
and
was that like?
Ridiculously similar. It was surreal. I sat down and had to. I was talking to one of them, and then we just stopped and said, "This is like looking at each, like looking in a mirror almost. It's the most kind of surreal experience you could imagine." And we all look quite similar, but they've all found out in different ways over the years, and actually they've all got the same kind of desire to know where they come from, and just it's interesting to hear the previous caller's perspective, because
yes,
the only thing really that I'd like to see is maybe a photograph or something like that. I'm not looking to form a relationship or.
Okay, so this is what I read to John about. You would benefit emotionally from just knowing more.
Exactly. Yeah. Just knowing maybe who he was, or to be honest, a photograph or something, just to kind of have some kind of idea of where we come from. But it's not. I'm not looking to. Find another dad. I'm not looking for a relationship. It's just a kind of. I think, had we been told as kids, which I completely understand my parents' position. They were told not to say anything by the doctors, and after a certain amount of years, what's the point in telling us? Or how do you bring it up when you're a teenager or in your early 20s? Or it's kind of. I don't have any. Anger or anything towards mum. To be honest, speaking to her mum about it, I just wanted to make sure she was all right. But
does she know that? Does mum know that you know now?
Yeah, so I went back home to ask her about it, which is a really difficult thing to bring up. But then, and for her as well, she never told anyone. She didn't tell my grandparents, her parents, or she didn't tell her friends or anything. They just kept it quiet, because I think at the time there was a lot of shame about the whole thing.
Oh, ignorance as well as shame, I suppose.
So actually, I just imagine at the time it must have been incredibly difficult for my mum and my dad as well, and stressful, years of trying to have kids and not being able to. And if it didn't do that, I wouldn't be here. So I'm massively grateful that they did it and that, the technology existed. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. So I've not got any issues on that side of it. It's just kind of a...
it's a big question mark, isn't it?
Just a big,
hanging over your existence. Yeah, you're a good lad, Mark. I can tell that you took your mum's feelings almost or more seriously than your own in that moment, I think, didn't you? Yeah,
to be honest, she's a worrier, and I know if I went home after that, she'd be worried about me. So I played down really how I felt, because in that first couple of weeks, it is a bit of a shock, and then you get used to it. but I've got your radio on in the workshop most days, and this came up, and I've never called in before. But
that's me. You thought he's talking about me?
Yeah, I thought I'd just give you a bit of perspective on
and it's
why.
Important because I think you and John, in conjunction with each other, have covered almost all of the bases. I would just ask you that, just your thoughts really, and whether you've given any thought to it on the fact that the donor from whom your life sprang was promised anonymity. So what did you make listening to John's call? What did that do to you?
I completely understand. And I've said, because me and my half siblings, we've tried to have a look on the DNA sites, and we've tried to figure it out, but we're just not good enough genealogists to figure it out. Right. But I have said that you can get. I mean, I've kind of listened to a lot of different cases on a podcast on the subject, and you get reactions from "Don't talk to me," or I don't want to know. Or you get reactions from let's meet up, and you get the whole spectrum. I've heard of cases where people have found the biological dad, and they've got a great relationship, but I'm not looking for that, but it does happen, and I think it's important to kind of see.
This is all human life is here, really, isn't it? It could be any one of 100 different conclusions could transpire, and it could go off in a million different directions. Are you going to keep looking? Are you going to keep trying to? Because you're clearly in contact with your half siblings, or is that? Do you feel the door is closed now? Is it?
No, I think. I've only known for a matter of months, so I'm kind of early stages. But I'd like to figure it out. Yeah, that's the plan.
Good luck, mate.
But yeah, I just thought I'd share that because
I'm glad you did. I can't quite believe how many lives are being touched by this conversation. I really can't, and it would not work without you sharing what you've shared. So thank you. And I don't think it's inappropriate to say good luck. I don't know what good luck is. If I could package it up and pop it in the post, I don't know what I'd be putting in the jiffy bag, but I mean it. I mean, good luck. You're navigating some crazy stuff there, and the absolute bolt from the blue element of it presumably can't be exaggerated at all. What? It must be a mistake. This can't be right. I'm sending it back.
Yeah, I thought it was a joke, to be honest. I just laughed at it initially, but yeah.
Well, take it easy. What are you making? What are you doing in the workshop? Make sure you get your head back together before you start operating any heavy machinery, Mark.
I'm just welding today, yeah.
All right, well, look after yourself.
Not too bad. Yeah, all right. Thanks, James.
No, thank you. You take it easy. And this is, 10,000 people by the end of the decade is only scratching the surface of the people who will be affected by this stuff. The genealogy side of it, that's both calls there. Having these issues arrive in their lives, having these little big emotional explosions in their lives as a consequence of those things that are good fun. Find out how much of you is Viking or Neanderthal. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. James, please can we go back to talking about the Tories being such a shambles, please? These conversations are destroying me. I know exactly what you mean, but it's really important. And I know that your tongue is in your cheek. It's really important stuff, this. And it was, I've only seen it reported in one newspaper. But my goodness me, what are you thinking of? Like pebbles being thrown into a pond and you having no knowledge of where the ripples will go, despite the fact that when you became a sperm or an egg donor, you were promised that there'd be no ripples at all. Barbara's in Brighton. Barbara, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
I donated 26 eggs in 1989.
Right.
So any potential sort of offspring would now be in their sort of early 30s.
Yeah.
And I say we because my husband also donated his sperm that year as well.
Okay.
But we were categorically, assured that no offspring would be able to contact us.
Yes.
We, at the time, I think because they were so emphatic that there was not a possibility, I don't think we really gave it an awful lot of thought about potentially what that might mean in the future.
No.
about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I became a little bit more curious as to whether, any egg donations, any recipients had been successful, and got in touch with an agency to say, should any children want to contact me, I would be absolutely happy to do that.
Right.
And I haven't heard anything, and I can only assume that the egg donation wasn't successful. The egg donations weren't successful. I'm also
or that no one's expressed a desire to make contact with you.
Yeah, of course, yes, or don't know.
Yeah.
And I've also completely, become put my DNA on genealogy, but that's because I'm, tracing my family tree.
Did you think when you did it of the possibility? I mean, because you listened to John's call, he did it without really clocking the fact that he might be opening up a.
I did I did in the back of my mind, and thinking that. Yeah, I'd be okay with that. But my primary reason for doing that was, an interest in my family tree. Trying to trace my tree. I've never had any DNA links, and I've never had, anybody contacting me through the agency. Same with my husband. My husband, was a sperm donor the year previously, and he's also on DNA. Has never had any links, any matches either.
Just because I'm a nosy Parker, and looking at the era that you're describing, what was it that prompted both you and your husband to become donors in the late 80s? If you don't mind me asking, sorry, I don't want to pry.
No, not at all. I think it was just loving being a parent so much, and just having such joy from having our children. I think with my husband, it was probably seemed quite an easy thing to do,
Yes, I think we all understand what you mean by that, Barbara.
Yeah. Whereas, I think when I made that decision, I perhaps didn't think it through about how intrusive or invasive.
No, it's a proper procedure, isn't it? Yeah, it's a proper
really
operation.
Was. Yeah. And to get 26 was. I was sort of hyper-stimulated, if you like.
Yes.
I think now that it's much more common to only get sort of 4 or 5.
It's the language of
like
IVF
that.
for a lot of people listening on what you're describing on the egg collection side of things, and the drugs that you wouldn't have taken, but some people listening would have done.
No, I did have to take them.
So you did. So that's why you were hyper-stimulated.
Yeah. Because they have to sort of, get my ovaries to produce all these, eggs. And then, of course, you have to go under a general anaesthetic to have them sort of harvested. I think it was so at the time I remember thinking it seemed such a small thing to do,
right,
to bring such happiness to to a couple.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing that you describe, and a beautiful reason for doing it.
But I think at the time I went into it perhaps a little bit naively. But
you're not sitting there in terror of someone getting in touch, are you? At all?
No. I would be happy for somebody to contact me if it was coming from them. I've no desire to trace them or to actively look for them. However, I would be more than happy. My girls or my children all know what we've done. My family know what we've done. Should it come up in conversation, my friends know. So there'd be no dark secrets there.
No, and that will be the experience of most people, won't it? But these and you were aware of what the genealogy. It's always one person. Someone very cross with me for repeatedly saying genealogy when it's genealogy. So I'm happy to correct that. They're a game changer that nobody really saw coming, albeit that in your case it hasn't made any particular changes to your situation.
Yeah, exactly. Mm.
I read you something, actually, Barbara, while you're here, from Bill, who's in Orford. It doesn't apply to, well, as far as we know, it doesn't apply to you, but it's a rather beautiful companion piece to the reasons that you gave for wanting to be donors in the first place. He just writes, I'm just catching the tail end of your phone in today, James, and I'm not in a place to physically call in, but could you tell the people who've donated that if it wasn't for people like them, I wouldn't have my daughter today. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And that's from Bill.
Oh, that's lovely.
Well, that's what it's all about from your point of view, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
And that is nice. Although, as you say, you're sort of entering into it. No one can really enter into it with their eyes fully wide open because it's such a new and uncharted thing to enter into. Thank you, Barbara. Talia, very, very, very important text, and I'm so glad that you sent it, and particularly glad that I saw it, actually. As a child conceived via sperm donor, we didn't sign away our rights to contact our biological parents. Our mothers did. Poof. I believe it's a fundamental right to know where one has come from. It's also important to prevent genetic diseases, etc. I think it's also important to remember that these sperm banks are huge money makers, and that's all that they are concerned with. I have over 18 half-siblings through my donor. And I tell you, makes no other comment. But my goodness me, that is yet another point at which you think I've got my head around this issue. Oh no, it turns out I haven't at all. Last word on this to Emily in Tottenham, although I suspect we'll be returning to similar territory because so many people are still waiting to speak. Emily, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm a mother of twin boys who are 8, conceived by an egg donor. And while I felt very confident that they would have kind of their oral history passed down from their father because it was his sperm, my partner.
Right.
4 years ago, he had a stroke and now lives permanently in a care home and can no longer walk or talk. So I know, as much as I'm happy that I'm a mum and it took 8 IVFs and £40,000.
Yes.
I know when my boys get to an age, I'm heading for a little bit of a car crash. Because they're going to be like, well, you're not my real mum and my dad can't walk to us.
No, you are their real mum.
Because I carried them.
No, because you raised them.
But you know how teenagers think a little bit weirdly sometimes.
Sometimes they do. But you are. I mean, allow me to say this, and I hope it's not patronising. But I speak as an adopted baby. You are their real mum, and you shouldn't let it enter into your head that you're not, Emily. Seriously.
I really, really hope so. Because
no, it's not a question of hope. You are. You wipe their bottoms, you change their nappies, you're the one that will hug them when they get dumped by their girlfriend, you're the one they'll nag when they want to go driving, you're the one that will lie awake at night waiting for them to come home when they reach the age when they go out. You are the one that has done the mothering, the parenting, the loving. You are their real mum, Emily.
Absolutely, but I just know that there's going to be questions asked.
And you can answer them. You can answer them easily. Because you're their mum.
These amazing people.
Yes.
You wouldn't get to be real mums.
No.
So thank you, everybody who's donated.
You can't say fairer. You can't say fairer than that. And I'm sorry for what you've been through, but as you say, there's 2 little lads there that need their mum, their real mum. Emily, you take care. Thank you. Good grief. I might have to go for a lie down after that hour. That was something else, wasn't it? Sorry, Charlie. Sorry. Iona and Jane and Shay, all the way out in Melbourne and others. That is such an important conversation. Sometimes on the radio, it's the only place. I know that you can't see each other apart from those bloody clips, but sometimes you stumble across a story where the radio is the only place where you get seen, the only place where you feel seen. And today, absolutely was one of those days. So thank you to everybody. If you did miss any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as stay up to date with the latest news from LBC. Rewind Live Radio on Global Player. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sangeeta Maiska.
James O'Brien on LBC.